Welcome to Maple Creek Watershed.
Hi, my name is Maurice Coulter-Boisvert. I'm a retired community advisor for this area, which is Maple Creek in Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam. Here at Maple Creek was one of the first examples of a group that didn't have anywhere to go but expressed an interest in the stream that they live nearby. So the story goes, there was an individual by the name of Doug Benny, a long-time naturalist really, who lived near Maple Creek, where we are today, and had concerns about the loss of flows. Well, in the early 90s and late 80s, I guess, the city of Coquitlam were concerned about developing properties adjacent to streams and felt that Maple Creek was a potential hazard to cause flooding and lawsuits and other problems associated with that. So the department actually gave permission for the city to install a device that was supposed to clip high flows out of the stream equation, but not interfere with the low flows. What actually happened is that the opposite occurred, and the low flows were clipped with the opportunity for high flows to enter the stream. Of course, in the summertime and during late winter, during low flow periods, the stream that once supported cutthroat and fairly healthy populations of coho and chum salmon, I'm told, was no longer able to do that. It was able to support chum because they come and spawn in the fall. But coho juveniles that have to live year-round in the stream really had nowhere to go. The stream channel was not only confined, but there was an associated loss of off-channel rearing habitat for overwintering and summer rearing opportunities for coho salmon, which also was the same is true for cutthroat. There is a small but remnant population of steelhead in the stream as well. This Doug Benny at the time was outraged when he found during low flows that there was a number of pre-smolt coho that were dead and dying in the stream. He gathered them up and presented them to the mayor at the time, Mayor Lucicora, and put them on his desk and said, "What are you going to do about it?" That triggered a response. There was communication with the Department of Fisheries, and they engaged the Resource Restoration Division at the time, who is a group that supports community advisors, but also is engaged in habitat restoration initiatives, restoring lost habitats, developing off-channel habitats, and in this case supporting the municipality, who wanted to do something about it to help their citizens and help the stream. What was needed initially was a source of water, which by now had been diverted elsewhere, primarily over to Hoy Creek, to the west of us here. A plan was hatched between the city of Coquitlam, a Resource Restoration Division, primarily Matt Foy, who was the biologist in charge, and with funding from BC Hydro and BC Gas, and with assistance from the North Fraser Salmon Assistance Project, which was a group of unemployed fishermen that were involved in a work program. They were able to secure funding to begin the work. And the first phase of the work was to find and install a well, which was done in 1995 or 96. And that well was able to deliver water not only to Maple Creek, but also to an off-channel habitat called the Grist Channel, which is part of where we're standing, just to the East of us here is the beginning of Grist Channel and where we are at Maple Creek. There is a bit of a problem with that because when if the well fails or the pump fails or the relay on the pump fails, which has happened before, the creek can go dry. The city of Coquitlam took heroic measures one year. They actually were given permission to take water from the hydrants in a nearby subdivision and using thiosulfate, which neutralizes chlorine, and that was able to sustain the creek until they were able to put in a new pump and repair the relays and do all of that stuff they needed to do. But it's tenuous at best. The Streamkeeper program, which started around the mid-1990s, coincided perfectly with all of this. There is a woman who lived downstream of us about a kilometer or two who has a beautiful piece of property with the creek flowing through her property. And she had learned of community advisors and called the department. They called me and I went to visit her, and she said, I am concerned about this creek. What can I do about it? It just so happens I had an outlet for her, and that was to become a stream keeper and to take some training, which was available through the modules. We provided stream keeper kits, which is a series of tools which stream keepers would use to take measurements of the stream temperature, the stream width, the flows, do juvenile fry sampling, identify whether there was adults returning, but primarily to learn about who else is in your neighborhood. And so landowner contact became an important focus initially, and to actually go out and deliver pamphlets and talk to the local homeowners whose backyards often were adjacent to the creek.
Maple Creek Stream Keepers are local people that live in the area, and we're out walking. We find that there's something wrong. We find out how we can fix it, who can help us. We gather the people together. We go out and we fix the problem. We monitor it to ensure that, hey, we've got the fix there. And we ensure that we keep an eye on the fix to make sure that it's going to be a long-term fix, and we share that knowledge with everyone else, and we gather people around and say, hey, you want to come with us? Look at what we've managed to do. And it's in our local area, and we gather all these people around, and we want them to have the same ability as us to make sure that our streams thrive, and that they have the same ability as us. When they see a problem, that they're willing to go out and fix that problem and find people to help them fix that and make their streams thrive like we do, because it's always a happy and a good news story when you have salmon coming back into your streams and when you have people interested in that.
And because the well was developed and water was being developed or delivered to the creek now, Matt's exploring the area saw opportunities to provide off-channel, which was recognized early on as being deficient in Maple Creek because of urban development and encroachment from housing and every other potential source of encroachment. To that end, a off-channel habitat was created with the Grist Channel, which I mentioned earlier, but also a pond which was developed using the new flows from Maple Creek, which is derived from the well, which extends way off into the forest here, almost touches the Coquitlam River. And there's two large ponds that make about 1,000 square meters, if my memory is correct, of new off-channel habitat, and is the source of some current problems since mountain bikers have discovered the area and have been using the forested area which we're standing in right now, as really unregulated trails. Because of the stream keepers, and their association with the city of Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam, they were able to get some help from the city of Coquitlam to install fences and inform the public of the sensitivity of the stream and the fact that every year juvenile salmon are released here in those ponds to seed them annually with coho juveniles. And they come from the Port Coquitlam Hunting and Fishing Club hatchery located in Upper Coquitlam River. And they've been operating since 1981. And so there is a collaboration there. Yes, one of the benefits of having public involvement program hatcheries, of course, is they're using, for the most part, exclusively the genetic material from that same river. Reducing the genetic drift, which is often associated with importation of animals from other locations, major facilities elsewhere. One of the challenges I had as community advisor here at Maple Creek initially, because our focus was elsewhere really, managing the collection of broodstock and the managing of the juvenile fish at the hatcheries. And here in the Coquitlam, there's actually 3 different small hatcheries dedicated to restoring the historic runs and the respective tributaries. So one of the first tasks I had recommended to Stella Carriere, who was one of the first to come forward and say, I'd like to become a stream keeper of Maple Creek, along with Doug Benny, and there was a couple of other people, Dan Phillips. I said, learn about where the creek is, first of all. And if you can, take a video camera and walk upstream. Start at the top and go to the bottom, or start at the bottom and work to the top. And they actually did that, and there is a historical record of what the stream was back in 1995. But one of the things that came from that, of course, is knowing more about the stream, since I certainly didn't know about Maple Creek or its importance or anything. I didn't know about flood boxes, and I didn't know many, many things to do with habitat and habitat restoration. Fortunately, there were people like Matt Foy, who's the restoration biologist in the Lower Fraser anyway, whose mentors were Dave Marshall and Ray Finnegan, who recently passed away. Ray Finnegan being the engineer and Dave Marshall the biological team. But together they formed an invaluable team to provide assistance to the streams through the stream keepers. And Matt in particular has a skill of being very familiar with geography and geology even, and hydrology, and is pretty good at air photo interpretation as well. And he would look at an air photo, and I'm not sure that he uses that method all the time, but he would look at an air photo and be able to see scars in the land where the streams used to flow. And would use that information to look at opportunities for developing off-channel habitat, which is the main habitat feature that is lost in urban areas. In a natural stream environment, there's off-channels throughout the entire watershed in most places, especially in the lowlands. And those are the critical habitats for coho juveniles in particular. And where Chinook exist, certainly for the early few months of their life, that off-channel is critical before they head out to the main Fraser River and into Georgia Strait. So the skills of air photo interpretation, geography, geology, and biology all combined is an incredible asset to have. And we're so fortunate in the Lower Mainland to be able to have access to that skill. And he would work together with Harold Beardmore in particular for this area, and Russ Doucette before him, who were the engineering component of it. And they had engineering technicians who would be able to interpret their instructions and deliver the operation of the machinery that was required to provide entrance to those channels, in some cases to re-excavate those lost channels. And they would work together with the local stream keepers who would either identify something that needed to be done to help their streams, or they would identify that on their own by working in the area to begin with. So that the combination of the community advisor working with the community, the stream keepers working with fisheries, the community advisor being the liaison to the resource restoration team, but also to the habitat biologist and also to the enforcement community, fisheries officers. You don't always get the results you want, but having those teams available to you is invaluable. Without that, the municipalities would not lend much credence to a group of individuals jumping up and down saying, "Save our streams." But these people are more committed than that. They're not only jumping up and down when necessary to say, "Save our streams," but they're actually putting gumboots on and taking measurements of the stream flows, the temperatures, the level of dissolved oxygen, where the stream is in relation to other developments and housing and encroachments, and their participation in things like land use planning and stormwater management planning. Integrated stormwater management plans is what they're called. Here in Maple Creek, there was a fairly significant initiative about even 3 years before I left, which would be about 7 or 8 years before now, which looked at all aspects of Maple Creek from top to bottom. And consultants were hired by the municipality to develop plans and have discussions with the community members, the stream keepers in particular, with the community advisors. And that whole thing led to implementation of integrated stormwater management plans for Maple Creek. This is something that just would not have occurred if it weren't for stream keepers' involvement in many streams. You look at Maple Creek, it's what, 3 feet wide and about 4 inches deep. And you wouldn't think that anybody would give a bleep about it. But these people do, and because of that, there are initiatives to restore habitats. I'm standing beside one of the first initiatives, apart from providing a new flow from a well, in collaboration with the city of Coquitlam. This flow enabled a minor diversion from Maple Creek into the head of the habitat pond. Behind me, it doesn't look much, except looks like a swamp. And it's that swamp habitat that is exactly what is necessary for coho and cutthroat juveniles to survive through the summer and through the winter in particular. And without it, the ability of the population to sustain itself would be very, very limited. This particular diversion was hand done and was an afterthought. The project was originally built, it created the pond, but it didn't have a direct inflow. It was a passive flow, so the outlet of this channel was set at a level of the stream channel so that water would, from the stream, would flood this habitat behind me. Oxygen became a bit of a problem, but there is some groundwater upwelling in the ponds and channels behind me. But this little diversion here, which was hand dug actually, North Fraser Salmon Assistance Program was very instrumental in helping to dig this channel between the Maple Creek directly. So it has a direct inflow with an outflow directly adjacent almost, which isn't the ideal circumstances, but it's certainly better than not having it at all. We're downstream of the last site by another 200 or 300 meters, and wanted to show you the good and the bad associated with small streams like Maple. We have the relatively pristine looking stream just upstream of this head wall. And this head wall was put in, I don't know what year, but it was intended to restrict flows going down Maple Creek during high water events. So it preceded the structure that was placed in the headwaters. One of the first things I was involved with when I started in this area in 1990 was an invitation by the city of Coquitlam to attend an event where Mayor Lou Sikora identified this as a habitat pond. It's been known as the Sikora Pond. It's between two head walls. The head wall here is intended, as I said, to make sure not too much water flows down Maple Creek, which would result in potential flooding of homes downstream. In addition to that, an overflow channel exists here, which takes water out of Maple Creek that is in excess of what can pass through that 12-inch diameter culvert and sends it off to Grist Channel and subsequently the Coquitlam River. The housing development here is very extensive. There may be 300-400 homes in this complex, and during storm events, rain events, the water is all collected and ends up here. The culvert underneath my feet is about 3 feet in diameter, and during high water it blasts out of here, and often the water is black or gray. Early on we approached the city of Coquitlam drainage engineer who with Diane, who was able to identify the possibility of co-funding. A storm scepter was installed, and that storm scepter it doesn't clean the water. It helps to remove sediment that would be associated with drainage from the housing development. It doesn't look like anything, but it represented about $20,000 investment on the part of the city. When the water goes in the storm drain, it not only takes the water that's occurring during a rainfall, but it's taking the water that's accumulated in the sump of each of the storm drains, which is can have antifreeze, brake linings, oil from the people changing their own oil, car washes, detergents, dog washing soaps, pesticides, herbicides applied to lawns, all ends up in the storm drains. Now the storm scepter, as good as it is, expensive it is, doesn't deal with those issues. I come back to the fact that this would not have happened if stream keepers or people like stream keepers didn't identify themselves as caring about this stream. Maple Creek just wouldn't be worth it. It's not worth it to fisheries, particularly. It doesn't support a sports fishery. It, other than being a tributary of the Coquitlam River, doesn't support commercial fisheries. It does, but not significantly. But it is one of the main arteries of the Coquitlam River and contributing to its overall health. And that's why Maple Creek is important. The community advisor would help to reinforce the voice of the local area stream keepers, and may lead, in many cases did lead, to the implementation of projects that wouldn't otherwise occur. Also, many of the groups would apply for funding to maybe BC Hydro. In the case where there are dams, the Fish Wildlife Habitat Compensation Fund, the name might have changed over the years, the Urban Salmon Habitat Program, and the Pacific Salmon Foundation, all of which were potential sources of fundings. Well, the community advisor was often asked by those groups to provide letters of support, and those letters of support actually seem to go a long way to getting acceptance and implementation. That, together with the fact that community advisor had access to a team of an engineer and a biologist who would also lend credibility to initiatives that were undertaken so that they could be vetted as being safe and valuable and validated in other ways. So in this case here is the fact that it's still here remains a problem. I forgot to mention earlier on that Maple Creek starts in Coquitlam, but right about here it becomes Port Coquitlam, and it stays Port Coquitlam almost to the mouth, and at the flood box is Coquitlam's responsibility again. So there's a tangle of overlapping responsibilities, none of whom have any direct responsibility for the creek other than the continuity that the stream keepers express in their discussions and negotiations and whatever. So I just wanted to reinforce that these things wouldn't happen without the linkage between all of the players, and that's key to having people have an interest in a stream as small and as insignificant as Maple Creek is in the overall scheme of the waters of British Columbia or Canada. Another thing I wanted to mention, I actually had an occasion where I attended here during a rain event, and the city of Port Coquitlam actually closed the flap on the culvert here, which prevented water flowing downstream during a high water event. And all the water was diverted down to the Grist Channel and into the Coquitlam River. I physically had to lift it up, open it up. I put a cable on it so it wouldn't be easily interfered with. And I got a call from the city saying, "What are you doing interfering with our infrastructure?" Well, it didn't go over well. I'll leave it at that. And the one concession I did get is that they removed the flap gate. So the restriction is still there, but at least it won't be fully interfered with. But I've had people block it with pieces of wood. This was the site of a big paint spill. Somebody decided that they would take all their colorful paints and they'd pour them in the creek. And one of the initiatives that the stream keepers do every year is they attend all the public events. The city of Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam both have environmental awards. They have environment days. They have the green days. The Rivers Day is another one. And the stream keepers, in particular Maple Creek, are very good at attending all of them. And that is in order to raise public awareness about their little Maple Creek and why they care and why other people should care. And one of their billboards shows that spill event in vivid colors, and where paint was just poured, and they didn't even bother to take the paint cans with them. They just threw them in as well. So that advocacy is another extremely important initiative I hadn't mentioned already.
Today we were at the Upper Maple Creek and we were talking about water quality and the problems that we've had in the creek historically. We did monitoring for many, many years using streamkeeper methodologies to look to see what our biggest problems were, and it looked to be oil and other contaminants that were coming from the road rather than things that were coming from swimming pools and things like that we have lower in Maple Creek. We worked with the city. We went to them with our observations. They hired a consultant to confirm what we had discovered, and we fundraised with the city in partnership to purchase an oil water separator. They dug out this massive hole beside the creek and they installed this, and it instantly started improving our water quality. And we noticed that we had fewer dead fish downstream. The city made an agreement, they maintain it for us, and every couple of years they come and clean it out. It was a great partnership, and it was a result of us doing monitoring.
So we're
just standing on Maple Creek. We're a few hundred meters upstream from the Coquitlam River. We're entering now, I like to say, old Port Coquitlam. We're in a light industrial area, but you can sort of see the creek has been pushed into a relatively narrow corridor. We got a road right beside us here. We got some townhouses on the other side. This is very common throughout the urban area of Vancouver, but these urban corridors are great wildlife corridors. They're great fish corridors. I'm looking down the creek and I can see the new coho fry have just popped out in this little channelized stream. We just found a bug about that big below the heron nests over there. So yes, they're confined. Yes, they're actually man-made channels, but they've been here a while. You look at those cottonwoods, I'm imagining they're 50, 60 years of age, and they're now protected. So I think we're lucky to have them. Could they be better corridors in the future? That would be nice, but I think we'll take what we got and try to make them as good as they can be. So we're standing on the lower end of Maple Creek. We're just a few hundred meters upstream from the Coquitlam River, and behind me is a little off-channel pond that was constructed. Now this little patch of forest is a park, parkland set aside, and that provided us an opportunity to create this off-channel or ponded habitat. Now this habitat's very rare in Maple Creek, because if we went upstream, we'll find the creek put into a very narrow corridor in commercial light industrial area, then through residential areas right to its headwaters. So when we looked at the opportunities in Maple Creek, we really are limited by the landscape, but where the landscape allows, we have taken this sort of action where various off-channels or ponds or wetlands have been created. There's a couple at the bottom. There's a large one in the middle reach on some CPR land. And at the very headwaters, there was land in another city, Coquitlam Park. This is Port Coquitlam. So we had to take advantage of the landscape, but there is opportunities even in a highly urbanized stream. So we have a little wetland pond that was constructed on the floodplain of Maple Creek. You'll see the little tops of the stumps here, so there's woody debris in there. So species, particularly coho salmon, but cutthroat trout are also quite common in this watershed. They'll come into these ponds at certain times of the year, particularly in the winter, when the little stream is up and down with the rain events. They'll come in here to get refuge. We call it winter habitat, and for coho salmon it's called critical winter habitat, which means that if you can winter in slow water, you'll survive, the literature says, up to 7 times more than if you had to deal with flowing water, because flowing water takes energy to persist in. So those little fish need these areas. In urban streams, they're very confined typically. So anywhere you can create these wetlands. Now this one is a little dead-ended pond. It's connected at the bottom end to the stream, and that's where the juveniles come in to refuge. And we were actually talking, there was a little bit of water put at the top end through a small pipe. And this is a common thing in restoration sites, particularly in landscapes like urban landscapes. They do require stream keepers to watch them and help maintain them with the help of Fisheries and Oceans or other groups that do this type of work. So Little Maple Creek Pond, it's functioning today for amphibians, not so well for fish. With a little handwork, a little maintenance, it'll work just fine for fish and be good for another 20 years, hopefully.
We're here at one of the off-channel ponds on Maple Creek. We have about 4 or 5 of these off-channel ponds. They're an essential part of the rearing of fish on the creek. They're primarily intended as off-channel habitat for coho. So the coho need a place to spend time after they come out of the gravel and before they go out to the ocean. And they like the calm water of for the winter time. They don't have to work as hard fighting the stream, and we find that the off-channel habitat increases the productivity of the stream quite dramatically.
So we're here on the lower end of Maple Creek, and it's just upstream. It's going to pass under the flood dike, which protects Port Coquitlam. This set 200-year flood elevation in the Coquitlam River, which is just behind us. So the Maple Creek flows under this structure, down a little ways, another 100 meters, and then directly in the Coquitlam River. So this flood structure is common throughout the lower Fraser River floodplain, and it protects people, but many of them are old and were not designed friendly for fish. This is a particularly old one where you'll see some metal baskets. They bring a temporary pump and pump water over the top when the Coquitlam is in flood. And of course, fish can't go through those pumps successfully, so they either have to wait for the fish pumps to end and the gates will open. Also, little fish we found out when we were doing assessments are coming up from the Coquitlam River looking for rearing habitat, and one of the populations we found here were Harrison River Chinook. They come all the way from Agassiz, come down the Fraser, up the Coquitlam River about 4 kilometers, and up this little section of Maple Creek. But this is the end of the line, the flood station. So this is a story that's repeated in hundreds of locations along the lower Fraser, and it just ties into Maple Creek, into this bigger story about Chinook salmon, particularly the Harrison River Chinook, which is our largest and most abundant Chinook population in BC, so it's one worth protecting. I was told that the pump house is scheduled for upgrade to a fish-friendly structure, which would be great because that should allow fish to move upstream as they wish and to move downstream safely. So we'll see if that happens. Hopefully it will.
And we're standing close to a floodgate and a pump house that controls the water inflow and outflow to our stream. We are so very lucky. Over the years we've noticed different changes, and our city has actually seen the differences, and we're looking so forward to a new update of a fish-friendly pump house and a wonderful new floodgate, and that should happen in 2023. But we've got a great responsive city and our partners that work with us, and they've seen the changes and they see the great things that can happen in Maple Creek when we see and respond to the new changes and the adaptations that climate change and differentiating weathers and high flood events and high water events do to our streams, and everything that we need to do to make our streams healthy and happy and our fish come back in our community. And urban streams are wonderful streams, and we want to share that with everyone that we can. And it's education, it's information, and I think all of us benefit when we find out about all of our urban streams.
Here's an example up here, these logs here. Now I'm sure these logs look pretty solid actually. So I think they're going to persist for, I don't know, any guesses? 20 years, 30 years, 40 years?
These guys have been here for 24 years.
24 years, so they've been here 24 years. They probably have another 24, I would think. But, and I see a little gravel pad. You mentioned they placed some gravel?
Yeah, about 2 or 3 years ago we put about 100 yards of gravel from where you're standing down to the creek.
See, that looks like it's been dug over because it's definitely deeper there and there's a bit of a hump there, so yeah. I could imagine a few coho or even a few chum would come.
We've had a number of chum in the last couple of years.
Yeah, yeah, they look really nice. Now, when we trapped this, I don't know, 15 years ago, we were looking at coho smolts moving out, but we caught in this section in the trap Harrison River Chinook fry. So it's sort of neat. They came up from the Coquitlam looking for these little reaches. It surprised me, yeah, how far they penetrated. This is, and I just gave a little talk because we were doing some work on Nikoman Slough. I live on the salmon, and we caught them 7 kilometers up the Salmon River. And they were so actively, we were running a downstream trap, a box, and the box was half in the water. And the only reason we knew, well, later we caught them going down. They got above the trap and came down. But we found them with their heads stuck from below, they got stuck. That tells you they were swimming really actively, like they wanted to go up. Yeah. So I put it down and I put it in presentations, you know, how far do they penetrate up these little tribs? And it looks like they go to the head of tide, and they won't go over jumps, but anything not too bad, like a riffle, they'll go up the edge. So, you know, 5, 6, 7 kilometers from the Fraser. It's quite a bit of habitat if you think about it. You add up all the creeks. Yeah, it's really interesting, the Harrison Chinook. And of course, Chinook are a big deal because, you know, the runs have been generally declining because of marine conditions, but also they're the species most linked to the southern resident killer whale. So your little Maple Creek is its part in that story, which I think is really interesting. Yeah, so this wood I see they've placed, it seems to be holding in pretty good, and that gravel pad obviously was used. So yeah, this is just a nice little urban creek that people put a little effort into to make it better, and it seems to be holding up quite well. Now, when you do count coho salmon in this stream, and typically you'd see them upstream higher.
We've actually seen coho.
Azada?
Yes, it is Azada.
Yeah.
And the question is whether they come up the stream or whether they come from...
Oh, the shortcut.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So you're right. So the ecology of cohos go to the top, so your little fry have the whole habitat to fill. But periodically you'll get pairs of coho even at the bottom end because they're maybe rearing in the Coquitlam River or the Fraser River. The studies on the Fraser, there's a lot of coho fry in the Fraser River in early summer, and they came from some tributaries. So the more they look at coho, they're realizing coho particularly have multiple strategies to survive. So let's say most of them would stay in your little creek, but a portion will go to Coquitlam, a portion will go to the Fraser, some may go to the estuary, some won't even rear a full year, they'll go out in October. And what they're finding, if it turns bad in any one of those life strategies, you got 2 or 3 or 4 other ones to back you up. If you had a total fish kill, I suspect you would get a coho run return for that year. So it makes sort of common sense when you live in an unstable environment like the West Coast. Even before we showed up, they had all these strategies. So, yeah. And that's why floodgates should be open so they can do their thing, and we got to keep the strategy of living in Maple Creek, hopefully, is their main one. So, which you guys are doing a great job. In these little urban streams, we tend to simplify streams to get the water to move quicker so it doesn't flood our houses or homes or businesses. That's been the trend since the land was developed in the late 19th century. But what we learned is simple streams aren't particularly good for species like coho salmon and cutthroat trout. And the reason, on a nice quiet day today, you know, you can, coho juvenile can float across a stream, no problem. But if you look back here, there's high water marks, so we get the winter rains or heavy rains. All of a sudden, this is a raging torrent. Where do you hide? Where do you hide from those high flows? Or alternately, we just walked by a new heron rookery, which was sort of exciting on Maple Creek. But we know those herons have to eat, and we know particularly the juveniles, when they pop out, tend to fish local first. Well, local is Maple Creek. So you live in a simple environment, and you're a little fish, and you got this big long-legged dude trying to have you for lunch. You need some places to hide. So we're standing here, I'm looking, that boulder was placed. You can dive under that for cover, both in a flood and or a predator. The wood particularly has got all those nice root wads, lots of little holes. When you're a little fish, you can jam in there during a flood and just wait out the flood. Or again, if a predator spooks you, you're not in a simple creek where you're highly vulnerable. So again, what we've learned from our past experience, as we simplify streams, they become less resilient to these events, flood events or predator events for species that live in the stream like coho, cutthroat, steelhead, and other species that we care about. So what we're trying to do where it's practical is add this complexity. Now we were talking just a little below us here, we're on the edge of the floodplain, and if you look at this channel, it was probably dug when they built the dikes. So it was a man-made channel, so it didn't have the natural gravels and pools that nature would have had here naturally. So the stream keepers placed gravel just below us, and I can see it's been dug over by adult salmon in the past. It's nicely humped up. So again, they put this diversity back, and it's, I guess, rewilding these simplified streams in the urban environment. And I should say in the urban environment, I think people say, well, when will restoration be done? And my answer is typically, I don't think it ever will be done, because this is a managed landscape. We live in it. There's impacts every day from our runoff, how the water flows. These corridors are confined by dikes and roads and other things. So we probably have to get in our head is to try to make it as good as we can with the conditions we have been dealt with and the time we've dealt with, and hope maybe some new techniques or new skills or new lands become available, and Little Maple Creek will slowly return to a much healthier place in the future than it is today. I would argue Maple Creek has probably improved in the last 15 years of what it was 15 years, 20 years ago. So we are moving in the right direction, I think.
We did a little bit of work at our little floodgate area down here. One of our members was taking a course at the University of Victoria, I'm not sure exactly what sort of course she was, but it came into the conversation that some of the stream down here at the floodgate could use a little rehabilitation. And she managed to get in contact with Lafarge Gravel, and they donated the materials and the equipment and operator so that we could lay some spawning gravel down. And in the process, we actually followed a procedure set out by some of the rehabilitation set up by the university students, where we put in actual stumps and loggy debris to create a habitat for other little things in the creek.
We're at the mouth of Maple Creek now. This is the installation that feeds water to the flood box. This screening device here, this box with the giant hoses coming out of them, are for use by the city of Port Coquitlam during high water events. The water is pumped at a tremendous rate through the impellers of the pumps, ending up on the other side of the Coquitlam River dike. The problem with it is the boxes are screened, but the screening is not always intact and can entrain juvenile fish. The pumps are so powerful and they draw so much current that a juvenile fry can simply get sucked up against the screen and get pumped through whether they like it or not, ending up on the other side of the dike as fish food. It's a problem that has been identified for a very long time, and that the city has not yet done much about, except to add more pumps, more water pumping capacity. When we were involved, the stream keepers, myself, and the city of Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam were involved in discussions around the integrated stormwater management plan. This was identified as an area where investments, so that in the springtime, the juveniles will have a safe exit without being chewed up. And there are examples of that using Archimedes screw pump as one example, where they gently lift the fish through a rotating disc, which delivers the water and the fish gently up and over the dike. That addresses the juvenile out-migration. But the flood box on the other side, during high water events, if the Coquitlam River is high, it closes the horizontal floodgates. Now, some of the floodgates are mounted from the top, and the hinge is at the top. So when the flow is pushing from the creek, it opens, but by a very small amount. And if you're a fish trying to get in on the other side, you have to dive down against the concrete pad and up and through. It's not impossible for them to get through, but it severely restricts fish passage. This installation was done, I'm guessing, in the late 80s, when horizontally mounted fish gates were the norm, or became the norm. And instead of being hinged at the top, they're hinged on the side. And with a lesser amount of flow, if this is a wall they're against, the gate will open by enough to allow fish to swim through this area here, between the wall and the edge of the gate. And the norm before some modifications were made, the gate would open during water being built up behind in Maple Creek, heading for the Coquitlam River, but would open up so little that fish could not swim between the wall and the gate itself. It took very many years to convince sympathetic staff in the city of Port Coquitlam to finally consider opening the gate and having it open by default instead of being closed by default. And what that meant, a simple fix, was to attach a chain to the gate to force it to be open. Instead of by this much, it would be open by twice or 3 times the amount. so fish could readily swim through that opening and up and into Maple Creek to spawn naturally. That was a big deal. As I say, it took almost the better part of 10 years. That practice is still used today, where the gate is chained, and during extreme high water events in the Coquitlam River, the city needs to release the chain and allow the gate to close. Otherwise, flooding would occur upstream here. There is an initiative currently to look at flood boxes all up and down the Fraser River. Most, if not all of them, except for in Surrey, a few that I know of, where they installed a fish-friendly pump. So instead of those pumps will allow juveniles to leave the system safely without getting chewed up, either by Archimedes screw or a new type of impeller, a slow winding impeller that safely brings the fish up through the pipe without chewing them to pieces. This happens up and down the Fraser River, at least to Hope, if not, we'll say to Hope, but there may be 50 to 100 installations where fish are not currently able to pass freely upstream and downstream into the arteries of the Fraser River. And the loss of habitat from that is very significant. It's not the reason for the decline of salmon overall, but it contributes significantly to it. So we're on the other side of the dike, separating the Coquitlam River from its tributaries. This is a conventional flood box. As I just described a moment ago, the gates, fortunately here, are mounted horizontally, which means that the gate can swing open more so than a vertically mounted floodgate. And as I mentioned, the city has now agreed to chain the gate open by default instead of having it closed by default. This also is the site of latest habitat restoration initiatives that the stream keepers undertook with the Department of Fisheries. Gravel was brought in, and if you look at the terrain around, you'll see that that was probably not a very easy task. But the Lafarge Concrete Company donated a bunch of gravel and labor to help with the installation of gravel during this section here. This is, I believe, channelized many years ago. I believe the original creek channel went straight through the old dike. And but now it has been, although it's not visible here right now, there is several metric tons of gravel that were placed along this channel, which is was utilized by Chum even before the project was completed. That was done about 6 or 7 years ago. What's maybe not visible to you here is the outlet of the pipe. There's an 8-inch pump or a 10-inch pump, as well as another 8-inch pump, which sends the water through a 1-foot diameter culvert, which is just visible on the other side. You'll see the chain link fence, so when the water blasts out of that pipe, it blasts against the chain link fence. So if there's anything that was in the pipe, like fish, their chances of survival of getting through, and not only being entrained in the pump and getting chopped up, but being smashed against the fence when they exit. So these are things which can be addressed, and we're hoping will be addressed when the implementation of the stormwater management plan occurs. And that will likely be a collaboration between the City of Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam, who share some responsibility for the operation and maintenance of this particular flood box. I just want to end with coming back to the fact that we only saw a portion of the habitat restoration initiatives here, probably $1 million over the past 20 years spent on habitat restoration initiatives coming from a variety of sources: BC Hydro, the City of Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and the Pacific Salmon Foundation. as well as some resources from the Department of Fisheries in the form of engineering and technicians who work with local area partners like the North Fraser Salmon Enhancement Program. And nowadays it's mandatory almost for collaboration with First Nations. The Coquitlam First Nations have been supportive partners throughout with giving permission or acceptance of proposals to alter the landscape in favor of helping salmon in their watershed. So the collaboration, as I mentioned earlier, would not happen out of the blue. And that's one of the biggest things, contributions that Streamkeeper program has made to the salmon resources in British Columbia, aside from the direct intervention by developing hatcheries and releasing juveniles. The fact that there are interested community people who work honestly every day thinking about the stream and what's happening to it. There just aren't the resources in the world available to give the attention that these people do every day. They're not always involved in counting salmon or releasing baby juvenile fish or planting plants or measuring the habitat or observing whether there is pollution events or sponsoring public events and raising the awareness with the public, contacting the landowners up and down the creek, communicating with the municipalities and with First Nations through the Department of Fisheries and sometimes with the province of British Columbia to bring about the changes that Maple Creek has enjoyed and so many other streams throughout British Columbia. It was estimated before Streamkeepers came along that there were approximately 10,000 volunteers that are supported by community advisors throughout the province. And I believe the number of community advisors was as high as 18 at one time, possibly more, but approximately 18. But they support, since Streamkeepers, from originally 10,000 to possibly 20 to 30,000 individuals who are involved in some way, shape, or form with the protection of local area streams like Maple Creek. Who would have thought? Not in my lifetime would I have thought that community organization would be able to make such a difference. And I'm humbled to be here to tell their story a little bit. Thanks for the opportunity.